Hello, everyone. By now, I'm sure everyone's heard about the shooting that happened on November 5th in Sutherland, Texas, in which an individual that was discharged from the United States Air Force opened up fire on a church. Well, the way he was stopped was he ran out of ammunition, went to get away, and he was actually stopped by an individual, a law abiding citizen, with a firearm. Now, that brings me into the persuasive speech. I would like to cover about the legalization and keeping legal our Second Amendment rights to bear arms. And why should you care? Well, you have the right to bear arms. It's your legal right. Gun ownership is a constitutional right. Most people believe it's too widespread to be reversed. There's a lot of guns in the country. A lot of people fear that even though if they give up their guns, there will still remain a lot of firearms in the country that are unaccounted for and that cannot be taken back. Also, guns are needed for self-defense. Most people believe criminals do not follow laws, in which case they won't give up their firearms and they'll continue to use them for illegal acts. And if guns are taken away, other weapons can still be used to commit crime. Now, the Second Amendment of the Constitution of the United States states that a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. This was established in the Second Amendment by James Madison in an effort to protect the citizens against Federalists and to fight back against a tyrannical government if need be. Now, the benefit of guns, one of them would be for self-defense, in which studies show that criminals retreat 55% of the time when a gun is drawn in self-defense, and that a robbery and assault victims who use a gun to resist were less likely to be attacked or suffer injury. Therefore, people with guns enjoy attacking people without guns if they think they do not have a firearm. Now, if the government were to go and try to take back guns from people, most gun owners believe that this is too widespread to be taken back. Now, there's pretty much more than one gun in the country for every person. So every person in the country can own one gun and there will still be an excessive amount of guns. It's estimated that there's roughly 357 million firearms in the U.S., in which 30% of Americans own a gun and 11% live with someone who owns a gun. You can see on the next slide, which will be presented next week, obviously, gives you a breakdown of roughly how many individuals in each state own a firearm, which would bring me to the next topic on how those guns would be confiscated. Roughly, it would take the government would have to pass a law banning all firearms, in which case they would probably be required to turn in all firearms by a certain date. If this didn't happen, a door-to-door collection of firearms would be conducted, in which a forceful confiscation would happen. Flaws with the confiscation is that the government would have to do a door-to-door confiscation. Now, this could take a long time. Also, individuals can claim that they sold their firearm or lost the bill of sale, so they wouldn't have to give up their firearm. They could also hide them, claim that the firearm was stolen, and simply criminals would not abide by this law when they would find any way to get around it. I think, moreover, we should look at limiting firearm ownership, possibly offering a buyback program for individuals who do not utilize their firearms, and warrant the removal for individuals in possession of firearms illegally. Now, we go back to the incident in Sutherland, Texas, in which the discharged Air Force member should not have had a firearm because of ATF standards. If you're dishonorably discharged or anything from the military, you cannot receive, trade, or sell firearms, in which case this person had one. This should have been noted and it should have been warranted removal for his possession of this firearm because he had it illegally. And it dwindles down to stricter laws for firearm ownership, whether it be background checks, the warranted removal, etc. Which case the Obama administration, when he was in office, had a firearm buyback program, which was pretty successful. They gathered up a lot of guns from people who didn't need them or didn't want them or simply just wanted the extra money. The next slide you'll see next week, then presented a slideshow, is why are guns needed, in which there'll be a short video displayed. It's also apparent that people need to know why you need firearms and what a justifiable defense is. In 2014, law enforcement reported there were 721 justifiable homicides, meaning that people were protecting themselves with a firearm. They were not to blame for the homicide of another person because they were acting in self-defense. Also, 440 felons by law enforcement when threatened by a firearm. So law enforcement protecting themselves, which was what was reported. And citizens actually killed 277 people during a crime. So citizens trying to stop a crime, citizens acting in self-defense of other people, etc. Next couple slides, you'll see some data from the FBI on people in possession of firearms and whatnot. But it's also important to understand when deadly force is justified in self-defense. So the internationally recognized self-defense expert Massad Ayoob states it best when he explains deadly force is justified only when undertaken to prevent imminent and otherwise unavoidable danger, death, or grave bodily harm to the innocent. So pretty much you're protecting yourself or other people from somebody trying to harm you or kill you or somebody else. I think it's also important that we think alternatively, using non-lethal force to neutralize or escape from harm without the use of force, whether it be carrying mace, pepper spray, tasers, etc., just to get yourself out of the immediate area and escape to safety to where you can call the police. Which goes into the next topic, that criminals don't follow laws. They wouldn't turn in their guns during a ban of firearms. They wouldn't stop robbing people at gunpoint. This just wouldn't happen. It's unrealistic to think that law-abiding citizens should have to turn in their guns and have to deal with criminals who aren't following these same laws and be in jeopardy because they can't protect themselves. And when we talk about access to firearms, there are over 357 million firearms in the U.S. that criminals have access to, whether it be stealing them, buying them, gaining them illegally, whatever it be, they have access to these firearms, and which is why we need them as citizens in order to protect ourselves. The next slide you'll see next week goes with crimes committed with illegal firearms, and it'll be a breakdown of a perpetrator who's carrying firearms owned by someone else, or a perpetrator was legal owner of a gun, or what have so. So we go into the fixed, in which we don't allow violent criminals to buy firearms, do not let friends borrow firearms, and focus on the illegal sale or the illegal gain of firearms. And if firearms aren't used or firearms are banned, other weapons will be used to commit crimes. There are vast amounts of other weapons out there that are being sold: knives, hunting bows, axes, hatchets. There's bombs being used. You name it. If there's a will, there's a way. People are going to find ways to harm other people if they want to. And when we go into statistics, from 2006 to 2015, there were 144 victims of that where guns weren't used. It was blunt force trauma, it was stabbings, there was baseball bats, machetes, knives, you name it. So what do we need? More protection from guns, whether it be law enforcement and law-abiding firearm-carrying citizens to stop other people from harming people who are innocent. and we need to find ways to break down the barriers between law-abiding citizens who want to carry guns and the people who are opposed to having guns. So, in conclusion, we talked about gun ownership being a constitutional right, gun ownership being too widespread to be reversed, guns being needed for self-defense, criminals not following laws, and other weapons that will be utilized to commit crime. And everybody should remember gun ownership is a right that should not be taken away. Instead, alternative ways to limit gun violence should be laid out and put into progress. Collectively, as a community, people need to come together and understand their rights and figure out what we can do better as a society in order to improve and stop these violent acts from happening. And a final thought from George Washington, who states, "A free people ought not to be armed but disciplined." So it's important to remember, even though you can have a firearm and that it is your right, you must be disciplined in the way that you use it and the way that you protect other people. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments or responses down at the bottom. If you have any insight, since this was a rehearsal, please feel free to drop it, and thank you for your time.